The lab report was still warm from the printer when Nathan set it on the dining table, face up, like a hand he'd been waiting 6 months to play. I was standing in the doorway of my mother-in-law's house in my flight suit, my daughter Amia asleep against my shoulder, dust from a Kandahar runway still somewhere in the seams of my boots. I had been home for 40 minutes. I hadn't even had time to shower. 99%, Nathan said, not looking at me. 99% she's not mine. The room 12 members of the Cole family, arranged like a jury that had already reached its verdict, didn't make a sound. My mother-in-law, Diane, stood beside her son with her arms folded, her jaw set the way it always was right before she said something she'd clearly rehearsed. You should have told us the truth from the beginning, Elena, she said. Instead you let us believe a lie for over a year. I looked at the paper. I looked at my daughter's father, a man I had built 9 years of my life around. And I understood, with the particular clarity that only comes from shock, that I was being asked to defend myself against something I already knew, in my bones, was false. Get your things, Diane said. Both of you. Tonight. That was the moment the porch light caught the shape of a car pulling into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the living room window. A car door closed. Footsteps on the walk. And then a voice I knew as well as my own father's, because for 4 years he had been the closest thing to one. Major Voss. Every head in that room turned at once. Lieutenant General Robert Hale filled the doorway the way certain men do without trying, not because of height, but because of the stillness he carried into a room. He had flown with my father before either of us wore stars or rank, and when my father died, he had quietly, without ceremony, made sure I was never without a mentor in a career built almost entirely of men who assumed I needed less protecting than I did. He hadn't been invited. He'd come because Nathan's mother had, weeks earlier, invited him to what she'd billed as a welcome home dinner, a courtesy she likely regretted the moment he walked in and read the room in under 4 seconds. I seemed to have arrived at an inconvenient time, he said. Nobody answered him. Diane's mouth opened and closed once. General Hale, Nathan finally managed. This is a private family matter. So I gathered. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. His eyes moved to the paper on the table, then to Mir's small fist curled in the collar of my flight suit, then back to me. Major, are you all right? I wasn't. But 400 people were watching me not be all right, and something in me, some old, trained reflex, refused to let that show. I'm fine, sir. He walked to the table without asking permission and picked up the report. He read it in silence for what felt like a very long time, while 12 people who, 10 minutes earlier, had been ready to throw me into the street watched a 3-star general read a piece of paper like it might be evidence in a court-martial. Which, in a sense, he was already treating it as. Who ran this test? He asked. I did, Nathan said. I sent a sample out myself. To an accredited lab, court-ordered, with a documented chain of custody. Silence. Or to whichever lab would print you the answer you wanted. Nathan's jaw tightened. It's a legitimate report. It's a piece of paper, General Hale said, setting it back down with the kind of gentleness that somehow felt more damning than if he'd thrown it. I've spent 38 years learning the difference. He turned to me. Major Voss. Did you consent to any testing? No, sir. Were you informed one had taken place? No, sir. He nodded once, the way he did when a briefing confirmed something he already suspected. Then he looked at Diane, and for the first time that night, his voice carried an edge. Mrs. Cole, you're asking a decorated officer to leave her home over a document that wouldn't survive being read aloud in a courtroom. He paused. I'd think carefully before you let your son make that decision for this family. Diane said nothing. Major, he said to me, I think it's best you and Emia come with me tonight. I didn't argue. I had learned, a long time ago, that when General Hale offered you a way out of a room, you took it before the offer expired. He walked us to my car. The night was warm, Texas warm, thick with the smell of cut grass and diesel from the base 3 miles east, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I buckled MAA into her car seat. Breathe, Major, he said quietly. I don't understand, I said. How does someone plan something like this? He didn't answer right away. He rarely rushed to fill silence. It was one of the things that made him terrifying in a briefing room and, tonight, strangely steadying on a suburban driveway. People don't plan cruelty like this in a single evening, he finally said. They plan it over weeks. Which means, somewhere, there's a trail. There always is. He handed me a card. On the back, in handwriting I'd later learn was his own, he'd written 2 names, a JAG contact, and a civilian family attorney named Grace Kim who, he said, had represented more military spouses than anyone else in the county. If this becomes what I think it's going to become, don't go through it without her. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. One more thing, he said, before he left. He wants you to react. Loudly, publicly, emotionally. It gives him a story to tell. Don't give him the satisfaction. He held my gaze. Give him the truth instead. It's much harder to argue with. I didn't fully understand what he meant that night. I would, within the week. Priya Sharma had been my roommate at the academy and my closest friend for 11 years since. She opened her door without asking a single question, took MEA from my arms so I could finally set down the diaper bag I'd been white-knuckling since Diane's driveway, and said only, guest rooms made up. Talk when you're ready. I wasn't ready that night. I sat at her kitchen table until 2 a.m. watching my phone light up with messages from Nathan. First angry, then wounded, then, by morning, quietly recalculating. Mom says you left before we could even discuss it. As though I had walked out. As though Diane hadn't pointed at the door herself, in front of 12 witnesses. They were already rewriting the night. I recognized the shape of it because I'd seen versions of it before, in every investigation I'd ever assisted with in 15 years of service. The first move after being caught isn't remorse. It's narrative control. They're already changing the story, I told Priya over coffee the next morning. Then don't give them room to, she said. I went back to the house the next afternoon, when Nathan would be at the company office and Diane at her Tuesday bridge game, to collect Mir's things. The house was quiet in the particular way a house is quiet when it's been recently, violently disturbed and then straightened up to look like nothing happened. Nathan's laptop was open on the desk in what used to be our shared office. The screen had dimmed but not locked. I told myself I would only take Mir's clothes from the closet. I told myself that for almost 30 seconds. Then a notification slid across the top of the screen. Bianca, everything went exactly like we planned. She won't even fight it. I stood very still. I want to say that some higher instinct told me to close the laptop and walk away. It didn't. 15 years of intelligence work told me something else entirely, that whatever this was, it would not exist for long once someone realized it had been seen. I opened the thread. Bianca, did everyone believe the report? Nathan, every single one of them. Even my mother. Bianca, and the will meeting, did you push the date up? Nathan, Kim's filing the petition Thursday. Once the annulment's on record before probate closes, Dad's codicil doesn't apply to her. Company stays clean. Just us. I read that last message 3 times before it made sense. 6 weeks before MIA was born, Nathan's father, Walter, a quiet, deliberate man who had never once in 9 years made me feel like an outsider in his family, had added a codicil to his will. Walter had built Cole Sons Construction from a single flatbed truck into a company that employed 40 people, and in the year before his death, he had grown convinced that his son lacked the discipline to run it alone. The codicil split ownership of the company evenly between Nathan and me, with a clause specifying that if the marriage ended in the first 5 years, my share would convert to a trust for MIA rather than reverting to Nathan. Walter, it turned out, had understood his son better than any of us wanted to admit. Annul the marriage on grounds of infidelity, on grounds that the child wasn't his, before probate closed and the codicil never fully vested. The company, and everything it was worth, would be his and Diane's alone. I photographed every message with shaking hands. Then I found the folder Nathan had labeled, with almost insulting plainness, Company, Confidential. Wire transfers. $41,000 moved out of the business operating account over 5 months, routed through a shell vendor account that traced back to an address I recognized from the messages, Bianca's apartment complex. He hadn't just been planning to disinherit me. He'd been stealing from his own father's company to fund it. A car door closed outside. I photographed the last folder, emailed everything to my personal account, closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it, and was in my car with Mir's diaper bag before Diane had finished parking. Grace Kim's office smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than the machine in the corner should have been capable of producing. She listened without interrupting as I laid out what I'd found, then took my phone and scrolled through the screenshots twice, slowly, her expression unreadable. "Major Voss," she said finally, "I don't think your husband was trying to embarrass you. That's what it felt like. I think embarrassing you was the mechanism." She turned the phone screen toward me, tapping the message about the codicil. "This is the motive." She explained it plainly. What I'd stumbled into wasn't a jealous husband's mistake. It was a plan, built around a fabricated lab report from an unaccredited facility, timed to a legal filing deadline, funded by money quietly bled out of a family business, designed to remove me from an inheritance before it could legally protect my daughter's future. "He needs you to react," Grace said, echoing General Hale's words almost exactly, though she'd never met him. "Don't confront him. Don't warn him. Let the process do what your anger can't." It was, I would come to understand, the hardest advice I've ever followed. The company's own outside auditor found the embezzlement 12 days later, independent of anything I'd handed Grace, a routine quarterly review that happened, by cold coincidence, to fall exactly when Nathan least needed anyone looking closely at anything. Diane, it turned out, was still a 50% shareholder in her late husband's company, and when her accountant called her about a $41,000 discrepancy routed through a vendor that didn't appear to build anything, she did not call her son first. She called Grace Kim's office, having gotten the number, unknowingly, from her own attorney. I wasn't present for that conversation. I only know that by the time the court-ordered, accredited DNA test was finally administered, sterile room, sealed samples, a technician who documented every step the way General Hale had said real evidence should be documented, Diane Cole had already stopped speaking to her son. The results came back 9 days later. Grace called me into her office and set the sealed envelope on the desk between us without opening it. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. She read it once, silently, then looked up. Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. I hadn't doubted it for a second. Not really, not since the night it happened. But there is a specific, physical relief in hearing a fact you already knew stated in language no one can argue with. I cried anyway. Not from doubt. From the weight of finally not having to defend something true. Nathan's response, when Grace forwarded the results to his attorney, was a single line: "The lab must have made an error." "That's not the reaction of someone confused," Grace said, reading it over my shoulder. "That's the reaction of someone who already knew." The divorce and probate hearing happened on the same October morning, in a courtroom 2 floors above the county clerk's office, 7 months after the night Diane Cole pointed at her own front door. I wore a plain grey suit instead of my uniform. Grace had told me, once, that I wasn't walking in as a soldier that day. I was walking in as a mother whose daughter's future had nearly been signed away by 2 people who were supposed to protect it. Nathan's attorney tried, briefly, to frame the fabricated report as a father's panic, a mistake born of grief and confusion. The argument survived exactly as long as it took Grace to read Nathan's own message aloud. "She'll never figure out the DNA report wasn't real." The judge did not ask a second question about it. What took longer, what the courtroom sat with in an unusually long silence, was the financial evidence. The embezzled funds, routed to Bianca. The annulment petition, filed and quietly withdrawn once the fabricated report was legally worthless. The codicil, and the 6-week window Nathan had tried to close before it could vest. Diane's own auditor's report, submitted not by my attorney but by the company's counsel, at Diane's own instruction. The court's ruling, when it came, was not warm. It was precise, which was, I'd learn, its own kind of justice. Primary custody of MIA, with me. Nathan's visitation supervised, pending completed counselling. The codicil upheld in full, my share of Cole Sons preserved, converting into trust for MIA exactly as Walter had intended, protected now by a paper trail that made it nearly impossible to contest again. Restitution for the embezzled funds, to be repaid to the company, with the judge noting for the record that the matter of the fabricated lab document, filed, however briefly, in support of a legal petition, would be referred to the district attorney's office for review. Nathan did not look at me when the ruling was read. Outside the courtroom, he asked only one question, quietly, so his attorney wouldn't hear. "You think this makes you the winner?" I looked at MEA, asleep in her stroller, unaware that anything about her future had ever been in question. "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about making sure she never has to inherit your version of events." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. Diane never asked for forgiveness, and I never offered the kind she might have wanted. She sent a card, once, that winter, no visit, no gift, just 3 lines acknowledging that she'd chosen her son's version of the story before she'd asked a single honest question, and that the choice had cost her more than she expected. I kept the card. I didn't answer it. Some doors don't need to be slammed to stay closed. They just need to stop being knocked on. The DA's office declined to pursue criminal fraud charges against Nathan. The fabricated report, they said, hadn't been filed with a court, only used to justify a private family decision, and building a case around it wasn't worth the resources. But the civil judgment stood, the embezzlement restitution stood, and the codicil stood, ironclad, in Mears' name. Cole Sons brought in an outside CFO the following spring. Nathan no longer has signing authority on any company account. I made Lieutenant Colonel 18 months later. General Hale pinned the new rank himself, in a small ceremony with Prior and MIA in the front row, MEA clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking, loudly, why everyone was clapping for her mom. "Because your mom," he told her, crouching to her height, "always tells the truth, even when it's harder than lying." It was, I think, the best explanation anyone ever gave her for that entire year. It's certainly the one I've held on to her. People sometimes ask me, now, how I got through it, the humiliation, the fabricated report, the 7 months of proving something I never should have had to prove. I tell them the truth didn't arrive all at once, in a courtroom, with a gavel. It arrived in pieces, A message I wasn't supposed to see, a general who read a document instead of a room's temperature, an attorney who told me to be patient instead of loud, an auditor who noticed a number that didn't add up. The lie was loud. It always is. But it only had to be wrong once, in writing, to lose.